We know folks are hopping from call to call today. All right, I think I might have to go ahead from our production team to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you so much for logging onto our webinar, or if you're watching it after the live stream, thanks so much for watching the recording. Happy Digital Inclusion Week, everyone. Digital Inclusion Week, for those who don't know, is a nationwide event dedicated to raising awareness about digital equity and the vital importance of inclusion in our increasingly digital world. This week-long event showcases the collective efforts to bridge the digital divide and highlights the impactful work being done to ensure everyone has access to technology and the internet. And that is straight from our friends at National Digital Inclusion Alliance that I copied that information from. But this year's theme is about community-driven digital futures. So today we're bringing together the broadband policy community that are representing different perspectives, folks who are involved in research, folks who are involved with leading large affiliate networks, and also those who work alongside industry to connect consumers to affordable, reliable broadband. I'm really excited about today's conversation because I know folks are going to have great things to say. I have my notebook and my pen here ready to take notes on all the great things that our panelists are going to be saying today. My name is Elisa Valentine. I'm your host for today's Digital Inclusion Week webinar, and it's brought to you by Public Knowledge, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, the Center for Civil Rights and Technology at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and UnidosUS. I'm the Broadband Policy Director at Public Knowledge, and at Public Knowledge, we are an advocacy organization based here in Washington, D.C. We work to promote freedom of expression, an open internet, and access to affordable communications tools and creative works as we work to shape policy on behalf of the public interest. As you all know, high-speed internet is what enables us to do everything from access economic opportunities to educational opportunities to telehealth services and more. But what we've been discussing in our work through Public Knowledge is how broadband is also a cornerstone of our democracy. Broadband helps us build community. It shapes the way that we gather, it shapes the way that we learn, and the way we take part in our democracy. Broadband is also the foundation for how we seek out trusted information, how we share stories that might otherwise go untold, and how we document injustice and overreach in real time. It's how we show up for the most vulnerable among us, and it's how we support independent journalists who are not constrained by a producer or an owner, but are instead liberated by the truth. So while I expect our panelists today to go into the weeds of universal service fund reform, affordable broadband subsidies, BEAD non-deployment funds, and what's going on in our states, I wanted to ground us very quickly because finding policy solutions is not simply an intellectual exercise. The policies we advocate for today and that we enact tomorrow determine the fate of our economic, cultural, and democratic future. And it is imperative that we approach this moment with the same sense of urgency that we did during the height of the COVID-19 health crisis. So let me go ahead and bring to our virtual stage a representative from our co-sponsoring organization, Alejandra-Montoya-Boyer. She's a vice president. That's her new title for the Center for Civil Rights and Technology at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She's going to provide us some opening remarks, and then she's going to introduce our special guest. So Alejandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elisa. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much again for being here and spending time with us during Digital Inclusion Week. I'm going to keep this really brief. As Elisa said, I'm Alejandra-Montoya-Boyer, and I work for the Center for Civil Rights and Technology at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. For folks that may not know, the Leadership Conference is a coalition of over 240 civil and human rights-focused organizations fighting to protect, defend, and expand the right of every person in the United States. And a part of this work is recognizing the ways that tech policy, digital equity, and civil rights are inextricably linked. So we fight for digital digital equity, affordable access to broadband, amongst other issues like AI, data privacy, and other tech policy that's connected to civil rights issues. I want to begin by thanking Commissioner Gomez for being here with us today. We're especially appreciative knowing that you're spending time with us when you're working with limited staff during this government shutdown and with 9 open meeting items on the calendar for the FCC open meeting this month. So thank you so much for being here. And while I know amongst this group, she needs no introduction, I will briefly say Commissioner Ana Gomez has served as commissioner on the Federal Communications Commission since September 2023, where she believes the FCC does best when its work honors the people it serves. Not only has Commissioner Gomez always been a strong champion for digital equity and our civil rights communities, but she continues to be a loud voice within the federal government at a time when voices like hers are so often silenced. We are just truly grateful to have her with us today, and will continue to engage and support her work to ensure all of our communities can thrive in today's digital ecosystem. And with that, I'm grateful to turn it over to Commissioner Ana Gomez.
Thank you, Alejandra. Congratulations on your new role. And also, I just wanted to tell you how much I really appreciated Alyssa's remarks. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join. Unfortunately, given the government shutdown and the limited resources at my disposal, as you know, I cannot stay with you for the entirety of the webinar, but I'm pleased to share a few words ahead of your conversation. One of my top priorities as commissioner is digital inclusion, ensuring that everyone, everywhere has access to high quality, affordable broadband, regardless of income, background, or geography. Today, we rely on technology for work, education, healthcare, community, civic engagement, entertainment, and just about every aspect of our lives. That's why it is critical to invest in extending connectivity. Congress, through the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, provided billions of dollars to improve access to connectivity to every community in our country. As we continue to build out infrastructure, we must place trust in the communities that our federal funds intends to serve. They know best where funding is needed and what technologies will serve their needs. But funding connectivity is not enough to achieve digital inclusion. We also need to make sure that broadband service is affordable, and we had a great program for that. The Affordable Connectivity Program was the most successful tool our country has ever had to address the digital divide. It provided millions of families with a monthly subsidy. Congress has failed to renew that program, but the need to ensure affordability remains. The Universal Service Fund is a long-standing set of programs that can continue to provide investments for both infrastructure and affordability, but only Congress has the authority to change the Universal Service Fund in a durable, forward-looking way that can withstand legal challenges. No matter what the solution is, I feel strongly that affordability should remain a central pillar, and any new funding mechanism should not adversely impact consumers. When we invest in digital inclusion, we invest in our ability to learn, to access healthcare, to seek economic opportunity, and to get a chance to thrive in today's world. I often think of my brother Ruiz, who taught himself computer programming in high school by using a TV on our landline. He is now a successful business owner. Access to that phone line made it possible for him to pursue a career in and to thrive in a digital world. We must continue to work for digital inclusion to give everyone the chance that my brother got to thrive. I wish you a good conversation today.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gomez, for joining us, because as has been stated, you have a lot of things going on this month, but we really appreciate your inspiring remarks. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to bring our panelists to the virtual stage now. Our producer, Michelle's working her magic in the background. So I'm going to have folks do some brief introductions. We're going to start with Amy Huffman. Amy is coming from one panel to another. You've been hustling all day because it's Digital Inclusion Week. So thank you, Amy, for joining us. But if you all can just give brief introductions about your work and the work of your organization. We'll start with Amy, then we'll turn it over to Claudia. So Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Commissioner Gomez for the inspiring remarks. It's, it's wonderful to see someone care so much about digital inclusion that they're showing up even when we're in the middle of a government shutdown. I'm Amy Huffman. I'm the policy director for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We're thrilled to and love that the fact that we get to celebrate you all, celebrate Digital Inclusion Week with you all. We have over 371 digital inclusion events happening across the country this week for Digital Inclusion Week, and which, by the way, is more than last year. So even without like government funding this year, people are still doing the work. So we're just really thrilled to get to be here with you all to do the work. That's so important.
Thank you, Amy. Claudia?
Hey, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. So happy to be here. Appreciative to, Elisa and all my colleagues on this panel for pulling this together. My name is Claudia Ruiz. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Civil Rights Policy Advisor at UnidosUS. UnidosUS is the nation's largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization, where for more than 55 years, we've advocated for increased opportunity and advancement for Latino and diverse communities. Back to you, Elisa.
Thank you, Claudia. We'll turn it over to John Heitmann.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. John Heitmann, I'm a partner here at Nelson Mullins in DC, a law firm, but I've been working on lifeline and affordability programs for over a decade. And that work has included work at state commissions in front of the Federal Communications Commission, federal courts, and even the Supreme Court work we did this year. And then a lot of time spent in Congress on USF reform on behalf of clients, including the National Lifeline Association, which is an organization that includes many service providers who had operated in the ACP program and continue to operate in the Lifeline program. Look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, John. And last but not least, Jordan Arnold.
Hi, y'all. My name is Jordan Arnold. I'm a current graduate student at Princeton studying public affairs. I was also an author with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, and recently published a report about state affordability strategies. Up until January, I was in the Biden-Harris White House working as a senior policy advisor on our high-speed internet portfolio. So it's great to be with you all today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and dive into the panel discussion. So Amy, Digital Inclusion Week, we're going to start with you as a representative of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. So NDIA has long been at the forefront of this work of building coalitions that bring together organizations across different sectors inside and outside of the Beltway to really push digital inclusion forward. So to kind of set the stage for our audience, can you explain to us why this work of ensuring that everyone has access to affordable, reliable broadband alongside the digital skills needed to safely navigate the internet is more important and more urgent than ever?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think, many folks might have gotten into this field in 2020, 2021, when COVID hit and we saw really like it just peeled back that curtain of what had always been there, like a massive digital divide, but that it just really came out in the forefront for folks. Or maybe I just came from a disaster preparedness webinar thinking about digital inclusion prior to disasters. Perhaps somebody lived through a disaster and that really made it clear to them what living in the digital divide is like for the millions of Americans that live in the digital divide every day. So the work is more urgent than ever because the digital divide is still huge, right? Like at least 25 million American households Americans don't have access to affordable, reliable internet, right? And everything is still online. And it's just more and more and more things are coming online. If you want to get your license renewed, you need to not wait for 2 days at the DMV, which is a real thing. Then you need to be able to access the internet, and you need to not only have an internet connection, but be able to navigate that website because it's not easy, right? And be able to have the skills to do that. Everyone knows that AI is the issue du jour, right? It's this big topic. We want our kids to be able to compete with folks across the world in jobs that will require AI skills. Well, AI skills are just digital skills, right? And if you don't have basic digital skills, then you can't even have AI skills. And AI skills need to be part of our digital skills curriculum for folks to be able to really be able to discern what's real and what's not. to be able to protect themselves from cyber scammers that are using this new technology to harm them. So it's a long way of saying we have the same digital divide, and yet we have fewer resources to close it. And yet technology isn't just waiting for us to figure this out, right? It's continuously being developed at a lightning pace. And so it's incredibly urgent that we fix this now and we set up systems that can help address things moving forward. And that's things like coalitions and digital inclusion ecosystems that are robust and have all the different pieces that you need to address the digital divide for individuals for the future, right? And so those things are critical that we establish those right now so that our country and everyone that lives in our country can thrive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. And Amy, we have spoken a little bit about the fact that we're in a government shutdown right now. So I just want to take another moment to acknowledge that and would love to know like what you're hearing about how the shutdown impacts people on the ground and also our government agencies who are tasked with working to connect families to affordable, reliable broadband.
Yeah, so I think right now, we'll see the biggest impacts to the agencies that all of us work with, which would be the Federal Communications Commission and NTIA. My understanding is NTIA staff are working, but they're not being paid, right? So that how long somebody, that starts to wear on you. And our understanding is that the other folks at Commerce, at NIST, who are help the grantees get their funding, or like the states for their BEAD funds, or some of them are closing out their Digital Equity Act grants right now. Some of those folks will be, in the office for this week, but maybe not next week. So that's a long way of saying it slows everything down. Right. And we just talked about the urgency. We don't have time to waste. We really don't. People have been in the digital divide for too long and they need support now.
Thank you, Amy. So Claudia, we're going to turn it over to you. I want to, think some more about kind of like the role of NTIA and specifically, thinking about the infrastructure law. And I want us to clear up some misconceptions right now because, a lot of folks seem to believe that, a digital divide was solved with a snap of our fingers with the passage of the infrastructure law. And there are folks who think that the BEAD program is just a broadband deployment program and that once providers build, people will come because the infrastructure is there. So can you describe for us the critical role that the BEAD program plays as a connectivity initiative as a whole and how broadband affordability and broadband adoption are central to the success of the BEAD program? I'd really like for our audience to learn also about what you're hearing on the ground about the critical role of BEAD non-deployment funds, and also what you're hearing from different members of Congress on both sides of the aisle about this topic, because this absolutely is a bipartisan issue. So Claudia, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Elisa. What I'll do is I'll start by describing sort of, the ways in which at Unidos and, all our partners on the stage kind of describe what the digital divide actually looks like. And in that description, I envision a three-legged stool, right? So one of those legs is affordable, stable, reliable home internet connection. Number two is being able to have access to a device from which you can actually access the full suite of the internet and its applications from. So we're not talking about just a smartphone, we're talking about actually a desktop, a laptop, a tablet. And then the third leg on this stool is ensuring that folks actually have the kind of digital literacy and digital skills necessary to kind of actually fully kind of deploy the internet, access portals, access applications, and increasingly, as Amy highlighted, actually start participating in our AI sort of driven world and society. Now, I lay that out. These are not just principles or nice theories to have. This three-legged stool is actually mapping on to a lot of the really stark gaps that we're seeing across communities, and particularly Black and Brown communities. So to get really concrete, 27% of Latino adults and 27% of Black adults right now do not have home internet. Straight up, just don't have internet at home. Now, on top of that, 22% of Latinos and 19% of Black adults only access the internet from a smartphone, meaning that when they're applying for benefits, when they're applying for jobs, when they're trying to watch this webinar, they can only do it from a smartphone. And then last but not least, data indicates that around 57% of Latino adults and 50% of Black adults have low or no digital skills. Again, this is in a world in which already 92% of all jobs require some level of digital skilling. So to really kind of underscore not only the fact that the gaps are stark, but the fact that we can anticipate these gaps to widen as we continue to see a lack of resourcing or a rollback of certain investment programs that were supposed to actually address these really critical issues. Now, I lay that all out to kind of bring us back to the infrastructure law, which in itself was really sort of like a very innovative and revolutionary kind of bill in the sense that at least the digital equity and inclusion pieces mapped directly onto each of the gaps I just named. So I'll start with the ACP. ACP did a great job of addressing the affordability gap, which is very much top of mind for all communities and all individuals. Right now, about 1 in 5 Americans cite the cost of home internet as the #1 barrier for why they don't have internet or why they sometimes are disconnected. Now, ECP also addressed the device gap issue, right? Because it also provided a one-time benefit for which to purchase a device, which also then again, right, addressed that second leg. Now, the second program that was supposed to kind of be interconnected with the ACP was a Digital Equity Act, or DEA. And that was supposed to be what I would call the sort of human infrastructure investment. So ensuring that we're actually meeting folks where they are so that we can get them adequately trained, adequately skilled to actually go ahead and have the full suite of digital skills necessary to be competitive in our current workforce and job market. And now the third piece is BEAD, or the BEAD program, Elisa, like you mentioned. So again, that one is sort of at first blush kind of looks like a true and blue physical infrastructure investment project, right? Which is true to some degree. But to your point, right, the idea, the way in which that law was written was meant to provide states the flexibility to actually choose to spend some portion of that money on things in addition to the physical infrastructure needs that a particular state had. So that's where those non-deployment dollars come into play, right? And it should be up to the states who have spent years now working on their digital equity plans, working on their infrastructure build-out plans, right? All along the while, they were also told to make sure that they identify additional uses for those non-deployment dollars, which could go to workforce training, it could go to skilling, it could go to setting up digital equity and inclusion programs, it could be set up to do advanced sort of technical certificates, again, now that we're living in the era of AI. So taken together, you can see how these programs were meant and designed to be working together in unison to be a holistic approach to the multifaceted sort of issue of the digital divide. And right now, it's an open question mark on what states are going to be able to, or even be allowed to do if they're allowed to keep non-deployment funds at all. That's something that is still under deliberation at the Department of Commerce at NTIA. So, we are calling on folks to make sure that they weigh in with the Department of Commerce about the really critical need of making sure that all of these dollars are used in the ways in which Congress intended. And that the same does also go for DEA, which was unlawfully terminated, and making sure that we're also kind of at the same time pointing to the fact that we continue to need to fill the gap that the ACP left in supporting as many as 23 million households and actually having internet.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And we definitely are seeing, support on both sides of the aisle for these non-deployment funds because policymakers recognize how critical they are to be able to fully close the digital divide. So Jordan, as these issues are being figured out on the federal level, would love to know what states are doing to fill the gaps, particularly as it relates to broadband affordability. And based on your recent report, which I'd love for you to give us an overview about, are there any states that really stick out in your mind as leaders in these efforts? And what are ways that these efforts in states can be used to complement what could go on the federal level, whether it be related to, USF reform or what's going on with the BEAD program? Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. Thanks for that question. It's great because states are really true leaders here. They're tackling affordability from multiple angles. As you mentioned, I highlight this in a recent Benton report, Achieving Affordability, State Strategies for Getting Everyone Online. But what we do is we look at a number of different states around the country that in the last few years have implemented some sort of policy to promote affordability. And what we see is that states are getting creative, right? So maybe some of you have heard of the Affordable Broadband Act in New York State. That's a law that was initially passed back in 2021, but just went into effect this year, that requires internet service providers in New York State to offer service to low-income households at $20 a month or less. That was, kind of a big, exciting move from New York State. It went through years of litigation, and finally in 2025, they've been able to implement it. And I think just this November, we'll actually get a better sense of the kind of data about how that program has been going and how many people are enrolling. So you see other states looking to see whether they can implement something similar. Connecticut, for instance, just passed a law for a $40 low-cost plan that'll get implemented in 2026. And for those of you following BEAD very closely, we're also watching to see how this administration's NTIA, allows these laws to interact with the state's final proposal. The other kind of method we're seeing is state lifeline programs. So I suspect many of you are familiar with the Universal Service Fund. We see a number of states have created their own state-specific Universal Service Fund to kind of complement the federal action that we see through programs like Lifeline. So Oregon is one such state. They have their own state lifeline program that supplements the federal lifeline program. And just this year, they passed legislation to expand their own lifeline subsidy. So now, they were offering $10 a month in addition to your federal lifeline benefit of $9.25. Now they might be able to offer something more like $15 a month, plus offer a device subsidy. So in a case like Oregon, you see the state trying to work towards something that maybe more closely resembles the Affordable Connectivity Program. I'll also just say, states are doing some more creative things. In Arkansas, for instance, we saw bipartisan legislation to affirm click-to-cancel rules. Click-to-cancel regulation was moving through the federal government in the Biden administration, and the Trump administration has decided not to move forward with it. And so now this law in Arkansas acts as a stopgap. Even though click-to-cancel rules themselves don't actually lower the cost facing consumers, empirically, there's good research that suggests when consumers are empowered with, information about when their bills are changing, they can either switch to a lower cost plan or maybe call their provider and negotiate. So it does ultimately result in better service at a lower price. Finally, one of the most creative solutions we saw, all the states get funding from the US Treasury for a program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. These are federal tax credits that are allocated to states. The states then award them to developers to build low-income multifamily housing. These tax credits are enormously competitive and responsible for a huge amount of the multifamily housing that gets built in this country. And what we saw in Indiana and Pennsylvania is they said you'll get more points in your application if you agree to provide free internet service to all the residents in your apartment building. And so looked at Indiana's results for last year, for example, and every single winning developer offered free internet to their residents. So, it's a creative solution that I think we wanted to highlight in the report. So, I think the great thing about these state strategies is that these are not pie in the sky policy ideas, right? These are tried and true tested strategies that we've seen. I'll also just note, one of the things we saw about ACP is that some people can afford to pay nothing for internet. So while these strategies are important and they're important for, making sure that internet is more affordable, the states are doing what they can. We still need, a federal subsidy program like ACP to make sure that people who can't afford to pay anything can still get an internet connection.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jordan. So you kind of teed up things as it relates to Universal Service Fund. So I want to bring it over to John. Many of the folks here on this panel, and you also heard Commissioner Gomez talk about it as well, are thinking about, how we can bake in affordability in a more robust way into Universal Service Fund reform. We know that you just filed comments with the USF working group where you stated that USF funds should be used to cover a reform Lifeline program. That's something that public knowledge also agrees with, and I think everyone on this call agrees with that as well. So can you kind of walk us through how the Lifeline program has evolved over the years and why this moment really calls for a fresh look at its role within Universal Service Fund?
Sure. Thanks for the question. And I think what you'll hear from me in the next minute or two is echoing sentiments that have been expressed in this call already, bipartisan support for connectivity, right? Lifeline actually was established during the Reagan administration in 1985. And in 1996, during the Clinton administration, it became part of the Communications Act. And the language in Section 254 of the Act says consumers in all regions of the nation, including low-income consumers, those are the first subgroup they focus on, should have access to telecommunications and information services. It goes on, right? But that is a bulwark piece of that landmark statute that creates universal service. In 2005, Lifeline expanded into wireless services under then President George Bush's administration, right? And then in 2012, and in 2016, we saw the FCC take significant reforms to the Lifeline program under the Obama administration. Among those reforms were the creation of something called the National Lifeline Accountability Database, a current day infrastructure that is designed to ensure there's only one benefit per household and to protect the program against waste, fraud, and abuse. And in 2016, the FCC adopted rules that would then get implemented to form the National Verifier, a uniform third-party verifier of eligibility, again, to protect the program from waste, fraud, and abuse, and to get people convinced the program was capable of being run well and serving the intended audience of low-income consumers who need a subsidy to be connected. So why now? I would say now, Elisa, because the program has really struggled. The subsidy level has not changed since 2012, $9.25. As Jordan said, and I think others have said, it's important when you've got consumers, particularly the Lifeline eligible population. We did a survey showing about half of them are completely unbanked. Having services that can be calibrated to the benefit is extremely important. But when you have $9.25 to work with, that doesn't give you a lot. You can't go out and buy things for $9.25 today. You couldn't back in 2012. You certainly can't today. And so we have been advocating for Lifeline reform for a very long time. ACP came in. And with COVID, right, EBB, then ACP, we had a chance to look at some things that were a little bit different than Lifeline. The most important thing I would say that was different was a subsidy level. A $30 subsidy level as opposed to a 9.25 subsidy level was enough to do something remarkable. It got fixed providers, cable providers, and mobile wireless providers competing for the business of this consumer. And that doesn't happen without government support. And so I think that consumers could then choose which solutions best fit their situation, whether it be fixed or mobile. But I think today the reason is the ACP is gone and it's not coming back. So we have Lifeline, I think, is our best chance of getting something that resembles an affordability program that you all want that can address, I think, the most important part of the digital divide, the biggest part of the digital divide, which is affordability, and the most persistent part. And so I think that's why now, Elisa, and I think in the wake of the ACP, where you had supporters of ACP, I mean, none was more eloquent than now Vice President Vance, who was Senator Vance, right? And you've got supporters like Yvette Clarke from Brooklyn, right? You get across the political spectrum, people recognize that it is time to make sure that we connect all consumers because the price of not doing so is way too high. It's a very poor public policy choice not to keep people connected.
Thank you, John. I 100% agree. And you guys are hearing this theme of bipartisan support for affordability programs and also for broadband adoption programs. Amy, I know that you all also called for a permanent broadband subsidy in your comments that you filed with the USF working group. I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to add to John's points about that, but I also would love for you to dig in a little deeper to the idea of broadband adoption and walk us through this idea of a digital opportunity foundation. Would love to know how you're thinking about the ways in which broadband adoption kind of tie into like the economic engine of the United States, because I know that's something I've heard you discuss quite a bit, including in our various ex parte presentations with the FCC. So Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of summed it up, Lisa, but I'll try to add on. Yeah, we definitely agree that there should be a permanent federal broadband subsidy. I love the ideas that Jordan was talking about state by state, and those are necessary and important, and definitely we should continue working towards those as well. And we need stability, like low-income households need stability. And providers need stability, right? So this benefits both parties here, and having that national footprint also eases the burden both again on low-income households and providers. So we believe that, a modernized universal service fund that really gets at like setting some goals and vision for what it should be, right, is what we should be doing right now. And if we are really going to get at universal service, that is making sure low-income households can get and stay online. And what we do know from a lot of research is that some households might be online this month, but not next month, right? It's a month-to-month thing. There's a subscription vulnerability there. And so a modernized Lifeline program would be able to address that. So the only things I would add to John that we believe is that it should, and I think he might have said this already, but it should be able to cover voice data and voice data and text, right? Like all of those are necessary services. I like the idea of a household being able to split the benefit and be able to have part of it go towards their home broadband and their mobile or whatever they have, whatever their choice is. We liked the, in the program, how all providers participated with some guardrails, right? Making sure that they're, taking care of the consumers throughout the program. So all the things that John raised, we're pretty much in agreement with there. But again, think it should come through the Universal Service Fund and not appropriations, right? Like that it's really important that it's stable. In terms of a digital opportunity fund or foundation, whatever you want to call it, it's getting at those. Claudia did such a great job of unpacking the reasons why people aren't online. Cost, as John noted, is the primary reason, right? But there's other reasons too. It's the skills and the lack of devices and really not having that technical support or somebody to help them navigate the internet. So having support vis-a-vis digital navigators. Or not being able to find, not knowing about Lifeline or affordable broadband offers, right? That can be overwhelming. And so a national foundation funded by the Universal Service Fund, which is, again, its goal is universal service, would help mitigate and those issues that people have in getting and staying online. And it could be nimble, right? It could be a little bit more nimble than the federal government and really designed for small community-based organizations that are those trusted partners who deliver these services. And then those folks could then work in tandem with the federal government vis-a-vis the commission or NTIA to, elevate programs like Lifeline or the new Lifeline program, and also, any other programs that are out there. And it could be, it could happen a number of different ways. It could be a national foundation funded by the Universal Service Fund. It could sit under the FCC or it could be outside the FCC, its board makeup. There's a number of different ways this can go. But what we just want to stress the importance of is that we think about these things when we're thinking about the future of the Universal Service Fund, that it's super important that we're addressing all barriers to access in a household.
If I could, I just want to chime in on that because I think there's obviously a number of different problems with Claudia pointed out. And I think that for us, for Lifeline, it's most important that it addresses one of them, affordability. Not saying we don't need to address the others, but when we had ACP, we had critics of the ACP program allege that Lifeline, the ACP only got X number of people who didn't have the internet before. And it wasn't the adoption program. That wasn't the primary goal. It was an affordability program. So I think that we would, learn a lesson from ACP and recognize that adoption is important, right? And figuring out the reasons why, other than affordability, people are on, or in combination with affordability, they're not on. But I think to the extent we can put adoption or device challenges in different mechanisms, I think we'll protect Lifeline better and keep it singularly focused on the affordability piece. But I don't disagree that all of them need to be addressed.
Absolutely. And, I would just also add, just as a reminder for our folks in the audience, you're hearing about all these different barriers, affordability being number one, and then you're hearing about all these different issues with adoption. But you know what you're not hearing? You are not hearing that people aren't just interested in the internet. People are interested in connecting to broadband. They just need to be able to afford it, and they need the digital skills to safely navigate it. Because sometimes you'll see that work out there. And I think that there's a lot of you can get to an answer depending on the questions that you ask. And I know that Claudia, we weighed in with NTIA recently. Amy weighed in with NTIA recently about those issues related to like lack of interest, because I do think that most people in the United States of America are absolutely interested in being connected. But Claudia, I want to stick with you on like misconceptions as I did the first round of questions. Can you kind of help us better understand what's at stake if we fall short in this moment? We just heard folks, Amy talking about folks who are subscription vulnerable communities, people who cycle on and off of the internet, and that impacts people in rural communities and in urban communities. So would love to know what you're hearing and how we can kind of, combat the narratives related to politics of deservingness that are really at play in this moment.
Yeah, I always appreciate such a loaded question, Lisa. To your point about right, getting the right answers depends exactly on what we're asking. And I think this question is perfect in the sense that it really is the right question to ask because the misconceptions, the stakes, the politics of deservingness, these are all kind of interconnected. And at the heart of sort of this interconnection is just this general question, which is, what kind of a digital future are we really building? Is it one that works for everyone, or is it one that only benefits a select few? And my answer, to just start very simply and concisely, is that it cannot be considered success if it cannot be shared, and it should not be considered innovation unless it helps us all thrive. So let's talk about like what misconceptions we're really thinking we're living through right now. I feel like we're living and existing in this very bizarre moment where everyone is talking about innovation, right? This administration has made innovation a cornerstone of the administration's economic agenda. There's been an unprecedented level of investment in AI and AI companies and AI tools, and there's just this sort of sprint to be a global leader and position the United States as a global leader in the race for AI. So while there's billions of dollars flowing into AI development, into the infrastructure that is needed in order to sustain this development, at the same time, we have to ask, it begs the question, given all the policy choices we've been making related to connectivity, it begs the question of, when we're talking about innovation for who exactly? Innovation for the folks that are living in rural Ohio that still don't even have internet because of the fact that they're living in a rural area that lacks the infrastructure or the affordability mechanisms to actually help them adopt the internet? Is it innovation for folks that I've spoken with in rural New Mexico who have talked about having to pay upwards of $300, $400, $500 a month for very spotty satellite internet because that's the only option that they have? Or what about innovation for the single mother who is too worried about using sort of mobile or online banking because she has been a victim of scams or fraud, because she doesn't necessarily have the right skilling, the right tools to safely navigate the internet? Right. So again, we're talking about innovation. We're hearing it left and right. We're looking forward about this new AI world that's supposed to bring opportunity for so many of us. But at the same time, isn't it a problem that we're not even willing to cover our basic bases of affordability, adoption, skilling, and device access? What are we really talking about? So I think that is one of really sort of like the biggest misconceptions. Now, we also talk about the stakes, right? As Amy outlined, as your remarks at the beginning, Elisa outlined, right? Like, this isn't just about technology. This is changing our culture. This is changing our democracy. This is changing our economy. It's even going to change the landscape of our job and labor market. Right. And so that's really what's at stake here, is all of that taken together and making sure that we're actually making policy choices and using sort of mechanisms that actually advance and meet the needs of people right now so that they are actually positioned to be able to take full advantage of this new tech future. And so, I really appreciate also you asking, like, what am I actually hearing from communities, right? And the interesting thing is that whether it was communities in rural or urban areas, we're kind of hearing the same thing, and that's a general sentiment of frustration. The communities that I've spoken with directly, whether it's through listening sessions or focus groups, None of them are asking who deserves innovation or who deserves connectivity. What they're actually tending to ask is, why is it that innovation keeps happening to them rather than actually happening with them? And then on top of that, why are they expected to navigate an increasingly digital and AI-driven world without the tools, skills, resources, or even voice to actually participate and shape it? So if we really want to talk about innovation, if we really want to kind of change the frame of a lot of this politics of deservingness, we need to actually honor and recognize and walk the walk when it comes to realizing that real innovation comes from diverse perspectives. It comes from communities that see problems that otherwise that policy mechanisms right now miss or overlook. And real innovation comes from people who have had to be creative just to survive in systems that were not necessarily built for them. And so the idea is you can't necessarily tap into innovation when people are in this digital survival mode, right? Just trying to get by, when they're just trying to fill out job applications on their phone or kids are doing their homework in parking lots, right? That's not necessarily access. What we need to do is make sure that we're making all the right policy choices, whether it's USF reform, expanding Lifeline, bringing back a permanent affordability benefit, making sure that we're actually using the full, robust sort of BEAD program dollars to address more than basic infrastructure. Those are the things that we need to be doing in order to ensure that we're actually truly innovative. So yes, there's a misconception about who benefits, but I think the real misconception is thinking that we can do any of this without addressing those needs first. Because again, it cannot be success if it cannot be shared, and it cannot be considered innovation unless we all thrive.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I'm just going to transcribe like everything that you just said and use that in future comments that I submit to the FCC and into the Senate working group as well. So, John, can we stick with this kind of like profiling of folks right now? Because I really want you to dig in more to the folks who are eligible for the Lifeline program right now, and I want you to dig into this concept of a no copay approach. I heard you talk about that a little bit. I heard Jordan speak about that as well. And like why a no copay approach to a reformed Lifeline program is so important to these vulnerable populations that Claudia just mentioned. And I would also love for you to talk about the importance of eliminating the time tax for these communities, which is in academic circles kind of known as, the extra burden that people feel from doing paperwork and long wait times and complex processes that kind of discourage folks from accessing programs that they need. So what can we do to reduce that friction and remove those burdens so households don't experience that time tax? John, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks for that. No copay is an innovation that happened in the Lifeline program in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Wireless companies calibrated the level of service, the level of benefit available. And over the course of time, we had to battle about, some people saying skin in the game would be essential. And I think one of the things we learned through ACP is that it was more essential to remove the friction between consumers and having their service stay on each and every month. I don't think about my internet going on or off next month because I'm fortunate enough to have a credit card on file. The majority of this population is not so fortunate. So we need to have innovative mechanisms that serve them, including the no copay model, right? So where service providers are allowed to calibrate services to the level of the benefit. Consumers can always pay more and choose to pay a copay to have a bigger service allotment. But for most of these consumers, especially when you keep in mind Lifeline eligibility, there are 30% fewer households eligible for Lifeline than were for ACP. So, Lifeline is not really vulnerable to the argument that it's not truly targeted to the poorest of the poor. It is. It is, 30% smaller eligibility population than ACP. Those subscribers each and every month, and I'm sure as everyone on this call knows and are struggling, right? And every month they have to decide if they have any money whatsoever, what to spend it on. Food on the table is often the number one choice. Energy bill. New shoes or clothing for the kids going to school, paying a car repair, paying a healthcare bill, right? If we remove the friction of having them decide whether or not the internet bill gets paid that month through a no copay option, we do a lot for them, and we do a lot for the society at large. We keep consumers out of emergency rooms that don't need to be there because they can do a telehealth call, right? We keep parents connected to their kids' lessons so they understand that a kid hasn't been in school 3 weeks, right? And what's going on there. We are able to apply to that job. We're able to do shift work, right? And we can participate in the sharing economy, right? Which includes jobs like driving Ubers, right? You can't do those things without the internet. So by not having that question of do I or don't I have connectivity this month, we take that away. So that's a really important part of the no copay option. And it does blend into your time tax question, right? Like I said, I don't think a minute about my internet being on next month. And with that no copay option, they don't have to think about it either. There are plenty of other things for this population to think about. And then in terms of time tax, getting onto these programs, ACP was remarkable. 45%, I think, was the participation rate of eligible households by the time it ran out of money. Lifeline's participation rate hovers around 20%. That is a fail. And it's a fail for a number of reasons. But we look at the Universal Service Administrator, and I can tell you that is a vast room for improvement. Some of it is on the administrator, some of it's on other issues. For example, when consumers can get verified to the National Verifier platform using electronic database DIPs, it's very quick, right? But the National Verifier has access to the Medicaid database, CMS, nationwide. It has access to SNAP databases in 23 states, meaning the majority of jurisdictions, what happens? They have to upload manual proof of program participation. That is already a big burden and a big roadblock. 70% of the people will not survive that process, right? That is a huge, huge barrier to participation. And also, it's costly. Not only is it costly in that these people don't get through to what they're eligible, the subsidy they're eligible for, but if you get the process of uploading documentation, you have human eyes instead of machines doing verification, that's very expensive and error prone, right? And so it's costly to us all. And we have decisions that go the wrong way when they should have been rejected, and they go the right way when eventually, sometimes we get good, perfectly valid documentation eliminated. So that's one of the reasons why we're proposing that uh, state database access be mandated, right? So that we can get people connected to Lifeline more quickly and more certainly, right? We eliminate fraud vectors. We eliminate the time crunch that it takes to sort of navigate that hurdle of finding the right documentation at the right point in time and getting the right person to look at it and make the right decision. It's a 70% fail rate was the last time I saw a statistic about manual verification. So I think that that's important as well. And I think about when we think about, particularly this was laid bare as ACP launched. I don't think USAC, the program administrator that handles Lifeline and handled ACP, was built for it. And so we saw volumes that were incredible, right? We saw hold times that ended up with people getting disconnected at the end of the day. And the end of the day, by the way, if you're in the West Coast, is 9 o'clock Eastern time. If you're in Hawaii, it's too bad. It's the middle of the afternoon. We can do better than that for consumers, and we need to do better. And if you're going to attract providers, fixed and mobile, I think there's some brand damage that got associated with the ACP imploding, right? And there's brand damage when you're trying to get somebody connected to a benefit and they're on hold for 4 hours and then they get dropped because it's the end of business day. So we think we need to have the infrastructure of these programs run much better. Now, I would bid it out to a private party, as California does with their Lifeline administrator, but we need to be careful and make sure that the infrastructure serves the people in a way that they should be served. It should not be a day's work to connect yourself to a government benefit to which you are eligible, right? And carriers who participate in a public-private partnership, which Lifeline is, shouldn't worry about brand damage because the administrator is not staffed properly, not trained properly, or doesn't have the right database access. So hopefully that addresses some of those things. I think it would be great to see a dashboard. For example, I live in Western Virginia. I drive by a hospital. I can know it's 7 minutes to see a doctor if I need one. You don't have any idea how long it's going to be if you're on hold with the program administrator. So it's caring for people and making sure that these systems work for all participants, the consumers, the carriers that partner with them, and frankly, the digital inclusion experts who are out doing the hard work in the field, connecting people to these programs and to service providers. It has to work for everybody and can work a lot better. And I think that hopefully addresses some of your question, at least on the time tax and the importance of having no copay options available. It's nice to say we'll have other options available. Consumers can always spend more. The reality is they don't. It's hard for them to find more, and it's hard for them to pay more, especially without a credit card to be on file.
Absolutely, John. I always appreciate when you provide folks tangible solutions. So for the Hill staffers that are on the call, I know that they're hearing a lot of great ideas right now. So Jordan, I want to close with you, and I want to spend some time talking about humanity, because at the end of the day, as John was just mentioning, connectivity is tied to whether our kids succeed in school, whether our families can access healthcare, whether communities can find and keep jobs. So let me ask you, why must our leaders, no matter where they are on the political spectrum, why do they need to view universal broadband as a priority? And for the people who are spending a lot of time educating those policymakers, what is it going to take for us to finally get this across the finish line? I know it's a very loaded question for the last 5 minutes of our panel, but if you can take that, that would be great.
Well, sure. And I'll start with something, way less grandiose, which is just say, I so agree with John's suggestion about the importance of, this ex parte data validation for eligibility, right? Part of my job in the administration was shepherding through those computer matching agreements for, agreements between the administrator and all of these states. And I think in like a year and a half, we got like 6, and we were like, this is amazing. And it's just, it just results in a worse experience for the consumer. And
You could
so
have used the law on your side that mandated access. I know that's not popular,
yeah,
but you think about it, it's
yeah,
a struggle.
it is a struggle. I mean, it's a trade-off, right? So, and I think in a lot of cases, saving people time and getting them the services they need is a worthwhile trade-off. But I mean, back to the question at hand, we've all talked about it. Commissioner Gomez, said it well at the top. You need connectivity to participate in modern society. You need it for, farming, for working, for connecting to a physician. And it's sad because it's like a pothole in the road. When it works for you, you don't notice it. You only notice it when it's a problem. And so all over the country, we have rural communities or people in cities where they either don't have the infrastructure hasn't been invested in a long time, and they're making do, right? They're making do with satellite or their cell phone or their connection that drops every couple hours. But in this country where we are literally leading the world in AI development, right? We are at the technological frontier. It is just so unacceptable that we have people that, millions of our neighbors still don't have a high-speed internet connection. As for convincing policymakers, there is no finish line in this work. I think we talked at the beginning that in some ways it felt like the infrastructure law was a finish line, even though we knew that wasn't true. It just felt like, back to the three-legged stool, it was like policymakers finally understood it's not just infrastructure, it's adoption, it's affordability, it's digital equity, right? But that was a very particular moment, right, where a bipartisan group of legislators were willing to say digital equity is important to us. And so priorities are moving, they are always moving. And so I think that means that this work calls on us as advocates to be flexible, right? We have to be opportunists. And so even if the words we use are different, the needs we all understand are going to be the same, right? So maybe we need to be stressing affordability in the face of tariffs and economic uncertainty. Maybe we need to be stressing consumer protection and digital literacy to prevent fraud and scams. Or maybe we need to be stressing digital skills for an AI-ready workforce, right? Those different messages are going to land with different audiences. And, I think it's important that we all just remember that, new opportunities and new windows open all the time in Congress, right? Hopefully we do not have to deal with another pandemic, but there are other moments where it's going to crystallize for folks just how important these skills are. And so I think as advocates, we just need to be ready with the language and framing that's going to make sense to them.
Absolutely. Be flexible and be opportunists. I love that. Well, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, to Commissioner Gomez, Alejandra, for joining us today. I didn't see any questions in the Q&A, so I'm just going to assume that folks learned everything that they need to learn from our great session today. But also wanted to invite you all to join us tomorrow. We're closing out Digital Inclusion Week in Washington, D.C. With Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee. We're doing an event at Georgetown Law tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. We're going to have a conversation about her book, Digitally Invisible, how the internet is creating the new underclass. And so would love for you all to join us if you're in the DC area or can easily drive to the DC area. Michelle just put some information in the chat for you all. But thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. I certainly learned a lot.